Hey everyone, welcome to the Ask Podcast. My name is Justin and I'm your host. And today we're joined with a super special guest. Her name's Cara. Cara, say hi to everyone.
Hi guys, thanks for tuning in.
So, Cara is a referral from one of our previous guests, Claire Walsh. So, this is a super interesting episode. You can see this is on Zoom because Cara's working internationally. So, Cara's got plenty of stories to share with us. So, I won't ramble on too much. We're going to get this started with the first question, and it's an icebreaker. We're going to get started with two truths and a lie.
Okay, so I had to think about this. So here we go. So number one, I play rugby. Number two, my dad played professional AFL. And number three, I can recite the alphabet backwards.
All super niche. I think the alphabet's true.
Okay.
I think the alphabet's true. I think your dad did play FL, and then I'm
Play.
gonna say don't play rugby. Did I get
I
that
don't.
right?
No,
Huh?
I don't play rugby at all. No, no, I didn't even know rugby was until I was about 15. So.
Yeah, right. I went
Yeah,
with that one because I know you work with rugby,
I
but
do.
I feel like that can be the easy trip up just because you work in it.
I thought actually, I thought that would catch you out, having
Yeah.
worked in rugby and not actually playing rugby or knowing anything about it before I came over here.
Oh, that's awesome. So yeah, we've mentioned you work in rugby.
I do.
But let's take a step back and just talk about where you started, what got you into physio and sports.
Yeah, so kind of linking into my three things I just said before. So I grew up in a really sporty family. So my dad played AFL for the Swans for 12 years or something. So from when I was born, I was always around professional sport and that environment, always watching different sports on TV. I was always just fascinated by injuries and what they were doing basically to get these athletes back on the field. So it was always something in the back of my mind where I was like, yeah, like that's cool. That's something that I want to get into. But it was a matter of, well, how do you get from like the desire to want to work in sport to actually doing it? And it's a bit of a process. Everyone's got quite an interesting journey to how they got to where they are now.
Yeah.
So my story probably first started. So I graduated at the University of Sydney. I'm out of the Lincoln campus and ended up getting a job through a clinic called Neutral Bay Physiotherapy, which is basically like it's a part of a H&A network. So there is 6 or 7, I can't remember now, different clinics, and they've got quite a good new graduate program where every week or every 2 weeks you'd actually meet up with the other new graduates from the other clinics, and you do like a bit of an in-service. So you could do like an ankle, knee, hip, whatever you want, and it was quite a structured new grad program. So it is something that I would recommend. It was very general population, so it wasn't as sporty as what I wanted to be doing. But fortunately, I then took the initiative to take up some opportunities to try to develop my sports understanding. So when I was in my last year at Sydney University, I applied for this thing through the APA called the APA Sports Mentorship Program. Have you guys heard that? Is that still going?
Yeah, I think I've heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was quite lucky that I was given 2 mentors who I cannot thank enough. So Matt McCutcheon was one of them. So he worked at the Sydney Swans for a number of years. He was also doing some stuff at Sydney University at the time when I met him. So he ended up getting me a bit of a role there with Sydney University, just doing some observation sort of stuff and helping out with their training sessions, all volunteer work more than anything else, just trying to get that experience. And then the other mentor I had was Leanne Chartrov, and she worked at Stadium Sports Physiotherapy under the guidance of Mick Moran, Tom Cross, Sharon Flarhive. So I was going in there once every fortnight or something like that, or once a month. I can't really remember how often it was now, and just kind of understanding what it's like to work in a sports clinic as well. So this is kind of stuff that I was kind of doing off my own back while I was working at Neutral Bay Physiotherapy, which was cool. So I was getting exposed to the sporting stuff that I really wanted, but then I was also kind of just refining some of my skills as a new grad, because I think the scariest thing about being a new grad is when you come out of university and all of a sudden you've got a case list and you're like, oh God, like what am I supposed to do with this? Like, where do I start? And you kind of feel a little bit like you're on your own. But it's a huge steep learning curve, and I'm sure everyone will tell you that when you first get into your first list and your first day of clinic is quite scary. So I was doing some stuff with Neutral Bay Physio for a year, and then I ended up getting offered an opportunity to go and work at Stadium Sports Physio. So obviously when I was with Leanne doing some stuff there, Mick Moran was also there, and so I kind of had my foot in the door in that sort of a sense. So ended up getting a job at Stadium Sports Physiotherapy, which was incredible. So I was there for nearly 5 years. And through that time, I did some stuff with just like random sports stuff. So I ended up getting an opportunity through the clinic to work doing I'm not sure if you remember the TV program, the NRL Rookie. Yeah, so it was like a reality TV show, which was really cool. So I did that for about 3 months, which was also quite interesting because I knew absolutely nothing about rugby league, having
Yeah.
been brought up with AFL my whole life. So it's quite funny. My first day on set, Freddie Fittler was the head coach of the program, and he introduced himself to me as Brad, and he asked for a calf massage first thing. I'm like, oh yeah, sure, no worries, like that's fine. So rubbing his calves, making some small talk. I'm like, oh, so like, what got you into coaching? Did you ever used to play rugby league before? Yeah, so that went down really well. That was a really good icebreaker. So that was my first experience working with some sort of NRL type semi-pro athletes.
Yeah.
So fun. So did that. Also got the opportunity to do a dance program. Gosh, what was it now? Oh, I can't remember. I've completely drawn a blank, but I'd worked with some dancers before.
Yeah.
And then kind of ended up through little bits and bobs, some athletic stuff, some softball stuff, and then ended up falling on an opportunity with the Sydney Roosters.
Mm.
So did some stuff with their under 20s program for 3 years. So I ended up working then part-time with Mick Moran and the team at Stadium Sports Physio, and then part-time with the Sydney Roosters under the guidance of Steph Brennan and Adam Bentley, who are incredible physiotherapists. So 3 seasons there, and then decided all my friends were getting married and having kids, and I was not ready to do that. And I was just feeling a bit stagnant, feeling a bit bored, wanting a different opportunity. So I started looking overseas and ended up applying for this job at Edinburgh Rugby. Fortunate enough to get an interview, which was really, really great. Very, very nervous interviewing, obviously. So before the interview, did a little bit of my background research and found out that my new boss at Edinburgh Rugby used to work with Steph Brennan at the Harlequins many, many years ago. So there's this really bizarre connection where they kind of knew each other, but kind of like hadn't spoken like 10 years. And it was this bizarre thing. So I then went up to Steph and just said, look, just so you know, I've applied for this job at Edinburgh Rugby. The person that's interviewing me is this guy called Adam Roberts. Apparently, like just through some of my stalking that you kind of work together. Would you mind putting in a good word for me? So he was like, yeah, no problem at all. Absolutely be happy to help. So then he had kind of rung up Adam and be like, she's great, blah, blah, blah. Then got the interview. So Steph had basically then interviewed me and filmed it and then sent it over to Edinburgh Rugby. And then, within a few days, found out that I got the job. So landed on that, and I've been over here ever since. So this is now I'll be going into my 5th season with Edinburgh Rugby now. And it's pretty incredible. It's a really good opportunity. It's the best thing I've ever done is relocate my whole life. So if anyone's looking to do it, hit me up.
That's awesome. What a crazy story, that one.
It's a bit of a weird story. So I've kind of been around the traps a lot.
Yeah.
But somehow landed on my feet over here on the other side of the world.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Oh, thanks. Sorry, it is quite a long-winded story.
No, it was great. But I did want to touch on your role at Edinburgh Rugby.
Yeah, no.
So you've mentioned to me prior that it's not exactly like a rehab-focused role. So can we talk through that a little bit? Is it still a physiotherapist role? Is it a more managerial role? Where does that kind of sit?
I'll probably start by I'll explain kind of the structure of how the squad works. So we have a squad of about 65 athletes currently. So as you can imagine, it takes quite a lot of physios to be able to run that. So the way that we structure our department is we've got our lead physiotherapist who does a lot of like the clinical managerial sides of things, sort of less hands-on, more management sort of stuff. But they make all the big decisions. Then we've got our assistant physiotherapist, and he's basically like my boss's right-hand man, really helps him out with all the rehab bits and bobs. So he's typically more rehab physio, so he's sort of fallen down that sort of path, but he's sort of that second point of call if my boss is unavailable. And then it comes down to myself, so there's another senior physio. So my role, because I'm not technically thrown into the rehab side of things, so I do a lot of the short-term injury management. I just don't do that much long-term rehab. So typically anything less than 3 or 4 months, like I'll be involved with. Depends on the athlete as well. So I'll be involved with quite a lot of the players that have got like chronic presentations. So trying to make sure that we keep those guys on the pitch. So having a look at what their running loads are like, what their gym programs are like, what their extras are like, everything that we can be doing to try to keep these guys on the pitch. That also involves a little bit of sort of being able to travel with them as well. So there's quite a lot of international travel that we do, which includes a few weeks in South Africa, which is always very eye-opening. So we'll travel with a squad of 50 there. So that's quite a lot with players and staff. Then we've got our junior physiotherapist, and she'll basically be in charge of kind of the guys that are the fringe players. So they're not academy players anymore, but they're not the senior squad players. They're kind of drips and drabs, yeah, that sort of involvement. And then we've got a full-time academy physio as well, and he'll primarily just look after the academy guys. So all in all, we've got 5 full-time physios, and then we'll get either 1 or 2 students as well, and they'll do a bit of the crap jobs, unfortunately, but it is a good opportunity for them to learn. So they do a little bit of the packing, the stock take. They get the opportunity to travel for games as well, which is great. They are able to get involved in some of the rehab, which is awesome. So they definitely get thrown into the club as well, but obviously quite heavily supervised with what they do when you've got some of these players they get to work with. So
Yeah.
do a bit of stuff with our kickers as well. So quite a few of our kickers have some issues with groins and hips and backs. And it's quite interesting to see sort of the muscle imbalances that you get with these guys. So obviously kicking with their right leg, they typically are a lot stronger on their contralateral glutes and their spine as well. So the lumbar spine being able to stabilize. So then it's like, okay, well, what do we need to be doing? Do we need to be doing some extra sets and repetitions of side hangs with their dominant side up? How do we try to target some of these air imbalances so that they basically less prone to be able to get these hip and groin and back pathologies? So I spend a lot of time working with these guys to make sure we keep them on the pitch and do everything we can to kind of keep them ticking over.
Yeah. I just wanted to touch on something you mentioned there. So
yeah,
obviously with the kicking sport, we're mentioning these imbalances that are quite often present.
Mm.
One thing I've heard is that for the sport, sometimes imbalances are a good thing. And you almost want to see this imbalance because that's kind of the specificity of the sport.
Yep.
Yep. But how do you balance that with kind of also wanting to work on the weaker aspects as well?
So it's a good question, actually. So it's a tricky one in a sense of obviously they're going to be kicking, so they're going to have these imbalances, but just because they've acquired these imbalances throughout their careers doesn't mean that we should just kind of completely ignore them. So I guess my opinion with this sort of stuff is test them with their diagnostics. So if you're doing a resisted abduction or if you're doing a side hang and it's quite an evident difference, well, what can we do to actually address aspects of that imbalance that might give them that sort of edge to be able to basically reduce the risk of injury and make them better athletes? You'll typically see just shifting away from our kickers a little bit. Some of our loose heads and our tight heads, they have different imbalances on their spine as well, just based on the way that they bind in a scrum. So you'll typically see that, I think it's loose heads, or they'll be typically stronger on one side where you can actually physically see the different muscle tone on one side of their spine versus the other side of the spine. And you can work as much as you can to try to balance that out, but you're never going to balance that out. So it's understanding the athlete, understanding their physical capabilities, and just trying a few little different things, I think, to be able to counteract some of those imbalances, but also understanding you're never really going to be able to change completely everything about this athlete.
Yeah, right. Okay, cool. Just wanted to touch on that one.
No, that's okay. No, it's a good question, because obviously, yeah, they are going to have these imbalances and you're not going to be able to fix everything. But if you can just give them 1% that might be able to help keep them going, then that's something that I think we should really strive towards.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thanks for that. I do want to switch gears a little bit here and talk about more career advice in general. Super interested for this part here because you've gone international, so that's a very unique route that you've taken.
Yeah.
But what brought you overseas in the first place? Like, why not try to find a different role or something like that in Australia?
Yeah, so I always thought it was quite funny. I always thought I'd end up down the AFL pathway. But getting the opportunity to then work in NRL, it kind of opened my eyes a little bit. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. You get a lot of injuries and you get a lot of really big injuries. So then I thought I would go down the NRL pathway. So when I was then looking at jobs, I was kind of like, Australia's really cool, but I think personally, if I wanted to work in sport in Australia, I'd want to either do it with AFL or with the NRL. So I was like, I could stay here and do that, or why don't we go overseas and just expose yourself to something completely different? Learn, is there a way over here where people do things a little bit differently? The physios are trained a little bit differently. The sport itself, rugby, completely different. They do big scrums, big line-out stuff that I was never exposed to in Australia. And the rugby over here is next level. So I don't think I fully comprehended how massive rugby is in the Northern Hemisphere. So I think moving over here just really opened a lot of doors, being able to network with quite a lot of people, being able to experience a lot of things. So in our league in particular, we do a lot of traveling as well. So being able to, even though you don't get to really necessarily see that much of the countries that you're traveling to, I think the ability in Australia to do that is quite limited. I mean, you travel, Australia's massive. You forget how massive Australia is. Like, it's an hour flight to Melbourne. It's an hour, actually 40-minute flight to Dublin from here. So stuff like that. So it's a really, really cool experience. So I think moving over and just experiencing that, it really develops your skills as a physiotherapist and just opens your eyes to a whole new way of doing things.
Mm.
So
Yeah. Now, what challenges did you face? I
I'm
see.
chasing the sun.
Yeah.
It's not normally sunny in Scotland, I promise. Um, Challenges. So I think the thing that I found really different when I first moved over is they called, it might just be the club that I came to, but they were naming things a little bit differently. So I can't even remember what we do in Australia now because it's been so long, but just the stages of rehabilitation. So what we use here is our protective phase, then we go into our early loading phase, and then we go into our load acceptance phase, return to intensity, return to performance, and then it's available for selection. So there are 5 stages. And I think for the first few months, I just couldn't get my head around what load acceptance was. I think we probably just call it plyometric training or running prep or something like that. So,
Mm.
so the principles are the same. The terminology just completely threw me. And looking back at it now, it sounds so stupid because it's all the same stuff. It's just the way that they were saying things just was tripping me up.
Yeah.
I think that's tricky. Other little things too. So sometimes they don't put as much value in some of the things that you learn in Australia. So, for example, in Australia, working under Mick Moran, he was quite heavily focused on like pelvic lumbo-pelvic stuff and pelvis moving and all that kind of stuff. I got over here and started doing some pelvic treatments, and everyone's looking at me like, "What are you doing? The pelvis doesn't move." So obviously, everyone's been trained a little bit differently as well. So being able to offer a different skill set is great. But then they also are offering things that you've kind of never seen before, like different thoracic spine manipulations that I'm like, oh, I've never seen that before in my life. Like, can you show me how to do that? So I think it's really good being able to expose yourself to that kind of stuff. But it is definitely a shock to the system when you first move over here, that's for sure.
Yeah. What about things like accreditation and just being able to work there?
Yeah, so that was a little bit tricky, but also simple. Tricky in a sense that it took a long time for the application to actually come through. So what you do need to do is apply for what's called the HCPC, which is like APRA, but it's the UK way of doing it. So you send all your university. I know no one probably keeps their manuals anymore. So what I did was have to go through Sydney University and say, could you please send me a transcript of my course? And then you basically attach that to the file, the HCPC file, and then you send that over to the UK. That took me about 4 months actually. So before I'd even started applying for jobs, I'd already sent through my application so that I could be accredited, which is probably a good thing. So again, that would be a tip for you guys is if you know you want to work overseas, start doing the paperwork quite early, because if you do get a job, then you're not going to be able to actually officially work as a physiotherapist until you get the paperwork. So some clubs will take you on as kind of like a supervised, sort of like almost like a student or a sports therapist sort of a role, whereas other clubs would just be like, oh no, like you're not qualified yet, like this is too complex for us, we'll just grab someone who is already qualified. So you do have to get that sorted. And then they've got this thing called the CSP, which is like the APA basically. So registering as a physio with that, and you can either do your CSP insurance. I've actually still got my APA insurance just because in the back of my mind, I'm always like, oh, if I move back to Australia, it's just easier, just keep it rolling over. So I do the overseas students fees with that, or not student fees, overseas practitioner fees, not student anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, so your HCPC and then your CSP, and that's pretty much it. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It's just a lot of paperwork and just allowing. So I think the day that I found out I got accredited was I was actually in Dubai translating. I was on my way over when I got the
Wow.
email. I checked my email in Dubai and I was panicking. So that worked out really, really well. So, yeah, just something to be aware of. So just start the process early if you're going to do it.
Yeah. Did you have to take any exams to get accredited in the UK?
No, not at all. It was literally just send your paperwork, here you go. So if you're under the age of 30, you could get a youth mobility working visa. I think they've actually since COVID increased the age, so it might be 32 or 33 now, but you basically get a 2-year working visa. And then from that, if you do want to stay, unless you've got dual passport, dual citizenship, then you have to get sponsored through work. So I'm quite lucky that I'm employed through Scotland Rugby. So Edinburgh is just a branch. So Edinburgh and Glasgow are our 2 professional teams, and that falls under the banner of Scottish Rugby. Scottish Rugby is also government owned, so it's quite a big organisation. So they have the ability to be able to sponsor me. But have a think that if you are moving over, just make sure that before you move over, the club does have the ability to do that. If you are coming on a youth mobility visa, knowing that you want to stay longer, just make sure that you've kind of ticked all your boxes and how you're going to be able to physically do that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So besides getting the process, like the accreditation process started early, do you have any other advice for, say, young physios who are trying to work their ways overseas?
Yeah, I think bear in mind relocating is actually a lot more expensive than I thought it would be. So just make sure that if you are thinking about doing it, maybe even discuss with the club the possibility of a relocation allowance. So some clubs will do it. Some clubs won't tell you that it's available, but it is definitely something worth looking into, because even little things, it sounds stupid and really petty, but like buying new sheets, new towels, like really setting yourself up from scratch, your pillows, your spices, all the stupid stuff that's going to sound really petty, but it does add up. And it takes a while to just get yourself settled as well. So I think it probably took me a couple of years to actually feel comfortable in Edinburgh, build your friendship network as well. So I think trying to join a few clubs, social clubs, so stuff outside of work, because you can very much get stuck in a bit of a bubble of, this is my work bubble, these are my people, and then like 90% of your life becomes your job. So it's really important. So I've actually joined there's an AFL club over here, believe it or not, called the Edinburgh Bloods. So I've actually joined the club there, which has been really good fun. So I don't really play that many games. I basically just go to a training every now and then attend a lot of their socials. But that's the best way to do it. So
Yeah.
making sure you're financially going to be stable to move over, making sure that you're meeting people outside of work, because it can become, your work-life balance can become really crazy if you're not looking after yourself. And then just enjoying it, doing all these things that you like, really try to remind yourself of why you're doing this, and try to set yourself little goals to, okay, cool, I'm going to come over here. I really want to this year maybe travel to 3 different countries, or I really want to go and see castles. So it sounds stupid. I think I've seen maybe 20 or 30 castles since I've lived over here. Castles
Wow.
are
That's awesome.
yeah,
Oh,
it is good fun. It really is.
yeah.
Most of the time. What I probably should have mentioned as well, now that I think about it, is with our international players, obviously. So with Edinburgh Rugby, we've got about 14 players that are in the Scotland squad currently. So they are then transitioning. So they'll be with Edinburgh for a certain number of years, the certain number of months, and then they'll go across and they'll play for Scotland, and then they'll come back to us. Then they'll go to Scotland, and they'll come back. So it's then a matter of managing their loads between the programs as well, which can be quite complicated.
Mm.
Yes, unfortunately. Well, fortunately for them, like, it is a really great opportunity, but it does get tricky when you're trying to manage what they're doing at Edinburgh, so that then when they go to Scotland, they're not broken. And then when they go to Scotland, come back to us. Or if they do break at Scotland camp, Scotland don't rehab them unless they're going to be available for that particular competition they're in. They'll come back and do their rehab with us. Um,
Oh.
yeah, so it is quite interesting the way that it works.
So how do you manage that?
It's really, really tricky. So we use Team Builder, which is an online program where we basically, all our gym programs and everything goes through there. So we can kind of see what they're doing in a Scotland program based off, and then what we're doing as well. And then it's a lot of communication between the heads of departments. So our head physio will speak to the Scotland head physio, be like, look, this is the issue. This is what the player's been doing. This is what we've been managing them for. I would recommend that you do ABC when they go into camp. And then the S&C, our head S&C as well, will contact their strength and conditioning coach and be like, this is their primary lift. These are the extras they're doing. They respond really well to ABC. And then they kind of do the same. So when they then come back, but we also have a note system, which all our Scotland players are in the same note system. So if we ever write a rehab note, or like a typical normal injured player notes, the Scotland physio can actually see that. So they can see what we've done and can carry on with that as well. So making sure our notes are really clear and concise.
What about daily monitoring and injury prevention as well?
Yeah, so daily, I'm chasing the sun again. Our daily monitoring. So what we would typically do is on a Monday, we'll just have a look at their counter movement jumps. And we basically, the purpose of doing this is to look at any sort of neurological fatigue from the game and kind of see roughly where boys are at. On a Tuesday, we've started doing so Tuesday, because that's a big training day, that will be our big monitoring day. So that will typically be, boys will have their phones and they'll enter the data here. So that gets sent straight to our sports scientists, who could flag any issues. But we'll typically do first thing in the morning, a body weight. We will do like, how did you sleep? That's all included on the Monday as well. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. And then we'll do an induction squeeze, just a straight leg squeeze. We'll do an isometric hammy pull as well. And they would probably be our main tests in the morning. And then at the end of that training session, the boys will come in post-session and do their top-up extras as well. Like that will be our heavy Nordics day, or a heavy like half capacity sort of a day as well. So from a monitoring point of view, yeah, Tuesday would be our big monitoring, and then that gets flagged with us. And then collectively as a team, we might go, oh, okay, this person's reported they haven't slept well, they're back sore, let's just touch base with them, see what's going on. Or look, they're reporting their hammies are a bit tired from the weekend. Still, it's Tuesday. This is now, going to 72 hours post game. Why are they still sore? So we'll just then touch base with the athletes. And it might be a matter of it was first thing in the morning and they weren't warmed up yet. So we might just put them through a battery of activation and then get them to redo the test, and then they're completely fine. So that's basically the purpose of the daily monitoring, is just for us to kind of see where they're at, see if there's any sort of data out there that's saying, oh, we probably need to be wary of this one. do we need to modify any training stuff for the day, or do we need some treatment, or what's going on? So trying to catch them relatively early in the day so that we can kind of manipulate what the rest of the day looks like for them. And then the back end of the week, we don't really do much monitoring. I think maybe a Thursday potentially might be some body weight, sleep, soreness, but nothing like your isometric tests. And we don't really do that in the back end of the week. So
Yeah. Okay. And you've also mentioned the injury prevention programs that you run, such as
yeah.
Pilates.
Yeah, so I've done a little bit of Pilates in the past. So this season has not been as effective. So I actually did my accreditation through, I think it was the APA Mat Work Level 1 and 2. And Claire is actually the one that got me into it because she did quite a lot of Pilates with the Swans. And back in the days, I was like, this looks really boring. I just don't think this is for me, Claire. And it's quite funny because now that I've got over here, I'm like, this is fabulous. I love doing this stuff. And I think it's because you can see like some of these massive guys, you get them in like a 4-point position with a hip extension and they just shake and they can't control their pelvis. You're like, how the hell can you hit this massive guy and not break? Like your actual trunk control is horrific. So it's really nice that boys actually do it and say, you know what, I feel so much better after doing that. Or you know what, I actually feel a lot more stable. So one of the ones, I've got a Pilates captain, which is quite funny. So he's been with me from day one with his training, and it's quite funny. So we did some Pilates stuff with him, and because he's a back row, so he'll occasionally go up for a line out. So what I did was make the program a bit more specific to his needs. So I'd get him doing stuff with like holding a band overhead and doing some trunk side flexion. I'd get him doing stuff with like a Pilates ball between his hands as well, and being able to squeeze that and then go up and then do some sort of shoulder flexion rotation movements, and being able to specifically target his positional needs a bit better. And he's always said to me, like, doing that stuff actually makes me feel as though I'm able to do my job as a back row better. So for me, I find that quite satisfying, being able to make them more specific for them. Whereas like your props, you might do a little bit more trunk stuff on your hands and knees. Your backs, you might do a little bit more sort of trunk stuff sort of standing. So you might get them doing some combined stuff where they've got like a standing sort of hip flexion with a shoulder extension sort of move. So they're pressing like a Pilates ball on the knee. So you do a bit more sort of anterior chain stuff for them. So I think that gets buy-in as well, is making sure that you are actually giving them stuff that they can see is relevant to their position, essentially. So yeah, haven't really necessarily been doing classes as such this year. I've just been kind of dripping individual Pilates stuff into people's programs. But from this season coming up, we're actually going to bring it back in. So it'll just be like a 15, 20-minute class once or twice a week. And a lot of the stuff we're going to focus on, particularly in pre-season, is going to be a lot of back and hip mobility, because they'll find that after 5 weeks of coming back into it, they'll feel heavier. They'll often put on a bit of weight. They will struggle a lot to get back into their running volume. So their lower backs get really, really stiff. They also start to gradually increase some of their loading in the gym again. So they'll find, their glutes get really tight, their hammies get really tight, everything gets a little bit yuck. So where I come in is trying to go, okay, cool. So it's first thing in the morning. Let's have a look. Let's see, can we open up your backs? Can we open up through your hips? Can we open up through your chest? And then what kind of stuff do we need to be doing for the day? So if they're then going to be going into a low body sort of lift day or a speed day, I might do a little bit more sort of glute focused stuff, posterior chain sort of stuff. If it's more of a upper body day, what I'll typically do is a little bit more so thread the needle, thoracic mobility stuff, some neck stuff. We might add some neural glides in through there. We might add a little bit more sort of combined trunk stuff where they're kind of sort of prone sort of position, pushing down onto the floor to activate like a T position or an I position. I kind of play around with it, to be completely honest. So I try to basically intertwine what I'm doing with what they're going to be doing later in the day. And in my head, it helps with their injury prevention. And they tell me that it makes them feel really good. Whether there's actually evidence to say that definitively that is helping, I mean, it's probably not. But I think if it makes them feel good and I can see that they're physically getting better at some of the tasks I'm asking them to do, then I see it's quite beneficial for them.
Yeah. Are there any other injury prevention programs that you guys run?
Yeah, so we do this thing called robustness, which is basically identifying some of the areas, the key areas for us.
Yeah.
So it might be on a shoulder day, and it might be stuff that we pick up from profiling. So it might actually change a little bit based on what we find this season. But we'll typically find that on an upper body day, we will spend 10, 15 minutes just doing quite a lot of rotator cuff stuff before they lift and opening up through the backs, like that stuff that the S&C will actually prescribe. And that'll be part of their warm-up there. On a day where they're going to do some low body stuff, they might do some stuff like might look at some ankle stiffness stuff. So they might actually do some like little single leg hurdle jumps and look at their ability to be stiff through their ankle, take some force off their knees. They might do some hurdle hip openers sort of stuff. They might do some what else? Some trunk stuff they might chuck in there as well. So I often see them doing planks and little bits and bobs there. So there is stuff that is kind of tacked onto the start of the gym program, which we call robustness, which is to prep them for their lifts in the gym. So that would probably be more of our injury prevention stuff there. So we'll have our Pilates stuff. We'll then have our pre-gym robustness stuff, and then we're also going to have our post-session extras, which are players that have been identified as not hitting their baselines or having weak things that have been identified through our profiling markers.
Okay. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the common injuries you see in rugby.
I think it varies from season to season, to be completely honest. I think the ones that are probably the most common trends that we see each year is the calves, which I touched upon before. The hamstrings themselves, I think we're okay. I think for me, we're probably this season particularly is calves and groins. We do get a lot of sore backs, but we don't really have much time lost for our back injuries. It's just got a stiff back here and there. I go into spasm, we lose a few days, and then we're back ready to go. I think our biggest time loss injuries, so we speak about that in professional sport of being like time loss is if you miss a day of training. So that's considered a day of time loss. So I think our biggest time loss this season would probably be our knees, actually. We've had a really unlucky season where we've had quite a few players have ruptured their MCLs. And that's quite tough because that's something that you can't really identify through any of your profiling. That's just wrong position, wrong time, more than anything else. Getting your feet stuck, someone diving at their knees, which you see a lot of in rugby, people diving at people's knees. So I think we've had, only one ACL this year, and we've had 2 or 3 MCLs. The years are starting to blend into each other, if I'm being completely honest, but I think MCLs are the biggest one this year, and we've also every year we also see quite a number of calf injuries. Concussion is probably a really high one as well, unfortunately, but we're doing kind of everything we can to be able to target that. So the new thing that we've got this year is a thing called the Polar Cap. So it's basically like a game ready for the head. It's quite interesting. So we haven't used it yet, but basically there was research that came out from professional ice hockey, which is basically saying that you can decrease your symptoms. So almost like if you roll your ankle, you go into the game ready. That would help to decrease some of your symptoms and pain. They're thinking this with putting it on your head. They've actually found that you can actually become more asymptomatic faster, or asymptomatic faster compared to if you haven't put it on. Now that doesn't affect our return to play. That just allows the athletes. So the new protocols that are coming out through World Rugby is I think you've got to stand down and not do anything for 3 days. Whereas historically we would have been able to get them down. They would have been able to get them back in 7 days. But now there's only quite a minority of people that we can get back in 7 days. And there's a huge amount of criteria. I won't delve too much into it because it does get a bit chaotic. But basically, if you haven't had a concussion a certain X number of years, then you can get back in 7 days. But I think 90% of our players, it's now a 12-day turnaround because they have had a concussion within the suggested number of months. If you get another concussion, if you hit a certain number of concussions, you have a mandatory 3-month stand down now. So there's a lot of research that's coming out about concussions. And it's also just educating the players to let them know that, we're acknowledging the fact that concussion is quite high in the sport, and there's a lot of research that's going into it, and that we are overall quite worried about like their mental health is quite important as well. So it's not something that we go, oh, it's a concussion, that's great, you're going to be back in a week, whatever. We actually are taking that quite seriously and putting as many measures in place as we can to ensure that their health long term. So in summary, concussion, knees and calves.
Yeah. Okay, so if we could pick one of them, could we discuss some of the rehab principles regarding those injuries?
Sure. Why don't we pick calf?
Yeah, let's do that.
Oh, okay. So calf, let me take my jacket. Oh, this sun in Scotland, it's getting bloody warm in here. So calf injury. So typically we'll see a lot of calf injuries come from if they've gone to backtrack and then into a hard accel movement. That's typically when we'll see a lot of our gastroc sort of stuff going. Soleus injuries are a little bit more, it's not as common for them to have a bang moment. So it does happen, don't get me wrong, it does happen. But you're more likely to see, if anyone kind of backtracks into a hard accel, it's more likely to be more gastrocs. But again, they're so closely correlated that you can't accurately say it's definitely going to be a gastrocs. So mechanism, so say player does the injury, they'll come off the field straight away. They'll have a little bit of a sad moment with the physios, and what we'll do before anything is actually check their markers, just for an interest point of view in terms of, okay, like how bad could this possibly be? Have they done a really good job of this, or is it actually going to be okay? Because a lot of the time too, especially if they've got a history of calf injuries, they'll panic a little bit as well. So it's about matter of knowing your athletes as well and being able to identify, oh, actually this could be really bad, or you know what, like it's probably fine, let's just check. So they'll come on in, they'll do a knee to wall marker. So you probably learned that one at university. And then they'll do a long calf measure as well. So to measure our long calf, what we'll do is we'll have basically one knee will be touching the wall. So you'll have your toes all the way up against the wall and your knee touching the wall. And then with your other limb, you'll basically slide your heel back as far as you possibly can until it starts to lift. So keep the foot straight, because a lot of the players will want to externally rotate their leg to try to get more range. So basically foot stays straight, take them back as far as they can. And then as soon as that heel starts to lift, that's kind of where you would then put down your marker. you compare left versus right. So you're looking whether there's been any significant loss to the range of motion. Sometimes it'd be fine. Sometimes you'll see straight away, they'll go, I don't really want to do that. Like, I'm really uncomfortable doing that. And if they do say that, don't push them to do it. Just be like, that's fine. Like, we'll check tomorrow. Like, calm them down. There's obviously a lot of, the mental things that come into it as well when they get injured. Like, this is their job. They're getting paid quite good money to be able to do this and function. Their body is their job. So
But
then
it's one of the
sorry?
first things you would try to do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll just have a look at a knee to wall and a long calf and just kind of see roughly where they're at, kind of gauge. Again, it depends. If they've completely blown out their calf, you're not going to do that.
Yeah.
But if they're able to walk in off the pitch, we would typically do that. If they can't walk off the pitch, we probably wouldn't, to be honest. We just ice them up, calm them down, and check it the next day.
Yeah.
We'd also then have a look at just a double leg calf raise. How does that feel? Is that painful? Can they do it? Can they do a single leg heel raise? Yes, no. That kind of steers you towards what sort of grade you think it might be. And then you'll get them prone and we'll start to have a bit of a look at our palpation. So where are they sore? Is it, I get nervous when it's sort of distal muscular tendinous junction. So that's where you typically get a lot of sort of involvement through the soleus and the gastrocs. The lateral compartment, for some reason, I don't get as nervous. I think there's the research out there is that their time to recovery is kind of a little bit less laterally. So I don't actually know why that is, but you'll typically find that the medial distal calf injuries are the ones that typically take the longest to get back. Not sure why.
Yeah.
It must be something to do with the load that goes through there. Again, positional stuff as well. You think about the position some of your props are going to need to be into scrum. But yeah. The proximal ones, again, I'm not too concerned about that. So it's the distal muscular tendinous ones. So I will then measure the length and the width of the location of tendinous, just have a bit of a ballpark figure of where it is. Obviously, if it's quite a long length of palpation, I'd get a little bit nervous. But again, you can compare that the next day because obviously the sensations are quite heightened during that time. So I wouldn't look at that and be like, oh my God, there's like 20 centimeters of palpation. This guy is screwed. I would basically look at that, acknowledge it, write it down, and then use that as sort of some markers for when they come in the next day and be able to reassess them. So from there, we'll then go through, so obviously the early phases of tissue recovery. So the inflammatory process lasts for 72 hours, peaks at 48 hours. So we'll get them on the game ready. So we'll ice them up and then we'll compress them and then basically tell them to go be off feet as much as they can. If they need to, if they can't walk pain-free, we'll put them on crutches. Sometimes we'll put them in a boot as well. So I think it's really important to protect the healing phase as best that we can so that we're able to develop some really strong scar tissue. And it's quite important to educate the players too that if you are putting them in a boot or you are putting them on crutches, it's for the long-term healing of their calf. We'll also educate them, obviously there's do no harm. So heat, alcohol, running and massage, they're the 4 things that we would kind of stay away from during these early phases. Because obviously sometimes they want to go home and have a pint, they're upset, they want a beer. So just making sure that, look, you need to go home, you need to hydrate, we'll check you tomorrow, let all the emotions settle, get them back in the next day. And I guess in this environment, we're quite lucky because we do have access to the players all the time. So unlike in a clinic where you might be like, oh, wow, okay, cool. Like, we'll see you next week. Like, we actually can progress things as quickly as we feel safely appropriate. So once they kind of pass that acute phase, so once they're able to, their range of motion has come back, they're able to do a single leg calf raise with a less than a 3 out of 10 pain. Again, the pain score, we take into account the type of player. Some players are historically quite high pain reporters, so we do take into account. And then we'll also get them doing a seated plantar flexion test. So one of those tests that we did in profiling. So we'll use that data that we've got in profiling because that is now their baseline. We'll use that to compare the data that they're getting now as an injured athlete. So from there, we would then start to kind of get early loading stuff. So I quite like really, really heavy isometrics quite early on. So I typically will start that depending on the severity of the injury. I might start some sort of low level activation day 2, day 3, sometimes day 1, depending on how they are, getting a bit of gauge for where they're at. And the reason I like to do that is to overcome some neurological inhibition. So basically, if you injure your muscle, you get a lot of the inflammatory cells through there, and then the muscles around deactivate. So we really need to introduce isometric exercises as early and as safely as we can, and that'd be inner range sort of stuff, so not any outer range stuff. We also use the complex sometimes, so it's kind of like e-stims sort of, just to get the muscle to activate a little bit. And we wouldn't put that directly over the tear site, we'll put it above and under, and it just might be like a really low level capillarization setting to help to promote blood flow to that area for healing. So that would be sort of our early phase stuff. And then kind of from there we'll start, so our isometric stuff, we can start inner range and then kind of build into outer range as able over the coming days or weeks, depending on the severity of the injury. We'll then have to look at concentric, eccentric sort of stuff as well. So getting them doing, like building them over the few weeks through full range calf raises in seated and in standing positions, taking into account when to start to introduce sort of horizontal loading patterns as well. So it might start with sort of like an A-frame sort of position where, or not so much an A-frame, but like a leaning tower sort of position where you've got a little bit of a horizontal load. So you're kind of in one leg's extended, one leg's up, and you're kind of pushing against a wall. That kind of makes sense. That sort of a thing. then you can start to push them through range as able. So this is kind of where I kind of shift my focus a little bit based on what their position is. So if they are a prop, I will introduce them to more sort of prowler-based isometrics or scrum sled-based isometrics earlier than what I would do with a back. And that's only purely just because of their positional needs. And then you kind of, you work your way through there. So then from your introduction of your horizontal loading patterns, that kind of then preps them then to be able to run. So if we start our early loading isometrics into our concentric eccentrics, introducing some of our horizontal loading, and then we can introduce some of our more sort of plyometric, low level, like running posture sort of stuff, whether it's sort of A walks, B walks, some sort of hip lock sort of drills. And then from there, we will reassess criteria as well before they run. So again, we'll be using their baseline seated plantar flexion. We do also a standing isometric plantar flexion as well. Ideally, a little bit of awareness is okay. Doesn't have to be pain-free to start your low-level stuff, but the numbers do need to be good. So I would like them within 90% to be able to return to run, particularly for your calf injuries. And then from there, it's a matter of you kind of your running progression. So with our load acceptance stuff, we'll typically start before we run. We'll take them through quite a few batteries of loading tests as well. So we'll take them through some what we call single leg pogos. So some single leg sort of hop testing or hop practice, some box jumps, some counter movement jumps, make sure they're safely and effective being able to do that. And then we'll chuck them on our force decks and have a look at what the counter movement jumps like. We'll also have a look at a 10-5 test, which is basically their ability to provide like a reactive ground reaction force. So they'll do 11 hops as fast as they can, basically. So they're going for height and speed, and then they'll compare left versus right. So we want symmetry with that as well. So we basically want evidence that the tissue is able to withstand withstand plyometric force and has a good strength capability before we run them. Yeah. And then once they're able to get through that, we'll kind of get them onto pitch and we kind of progress some of our plyometric stuff. We kind of dip it into some of our running prep stuff as part of our warm up. And then they'll start with kind of like what we call a tissue tolerance or like an intro run, which is normally just like a couple of sets of 850-meter tempos. And then we kind of build from there. So where we're at with the physio department is we will take the running. So they'll typically run a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, unless it's going to be an injury that we think is a short turnaround. And then we start to introduce, we need to think about things like when are we going to introduce their back-to-back days? When are we going to be able to introduce them to skills? What sort of running meters do we need them at? So if they're say they're a back three player, you probably want them to be up around 3.5 Ks of running meters before they're available for selection, because that's kind of what they'll be running at a game. You need them to be able to prove to us that they can run greater than 90% velocity and that they're able to react to stimulus as well. So change of direction, reactive change of direction stuff. That backtrack into accel as well. So sometimes they've got demons on their back about this is how I did my calf, so I'm not very comfortable doing that movement. So retraining them as part of your running program with that. So the physios will typically take the players through the introductory running phase. So their straight line stuff, introducing some change of direction, introducing some accels, some down ups, and then once we're comfortable, we'll pass it over to the conditioning team and they will kind of do that sort of real end stage reactive stuff, skill stuff, conditioning sort of stuff with them. So it's quite the process, but so once they're kind of back full training, they'll have ongoing calf extras that they would do. So at least once a week, they will come into the gym after that Tuesday training session and they will do their isometric. So we'll monitor them again, do their isometric testing, and then they'll do the capacity sort of stuff and they'll have some peak force stuff in their gym programs as well. I think other things I forgot to mention with the calf, I quite like to bias as well. There's a lot of stuff that's been coming out through British athletics about trying to bias medial and lateral gastrocs. So I typically try to introduce that sort of stuff as well with some of my programming.
How do you do that?
So just foot positioning more than anything else. So if you turn the foot out and then just get them to focus on pushing on the big toe, you'll get a little bit more medial gastrocs versus if you internally rotate and outside of the foot will be more lateral gastrocs as well. So, and it's the same sort of thing too. Like I do quite a lot of sled stuff with my end stage rehab to be able to then prep them to accel. So a lot of the rehab I do in the gym is to prep them for what they're going to do on the field next. So if I know that I want to introduce some sort of sidestepping movements, I'll get them in the gym and I'll get them doing some lateral sled resisted slide like steps essentially. If I know I want to start to target a bit more accel stuff, I'll get them doing some sort of forwards accel walking, or I'll get them doing, if they're going to introduce some rotation, I'll get them doing some sort of walking based patterns and I'll talk them through it and be able to cue them to push off the inside of the foot, and just little things like that. So I like to kind of plan my rehab and kind of be a step ahead of what they're going to do on pitch, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a few questions with that, because when we're talking about calf, in my head I kind of compartmentalize it to gastroc, soleus, and then probably Achilles as well.
Yep.
So obviously with all of them, there's the severity of damage, which will affect the duration of rehab. But if we look at, like if we just compare, let's say grade 2 for each one of them, Does
Yep.
the rehab change much?
Not too much, to be completely honest. It's just the length of the rehab phases that will change. The other thing to keep in mind is the grading system. So I think it's the British athletics classification system is what we go off over here. So a
Mhm.
2A is going to be different to a 2B, which is going to be different to a 2C, essentially.
Okay.
So if it is a 2A injury, they'll have their strength straight away. What I personally find is they struggle to get their range back sometimes, or they'll just have like this sort of like a tightness sensation that just kind of won't go away. Whereas if it's more of a 2B, they'll typically find they've lost their strength, and that's what takes a little bit longer to get better. And then sort of a 2C or a 3C, that's where the tendon is involved, and you typically need to have that rest period before you then start to load. So similar to that T junction that we're speaking about with the biceps femoris, if you've got tendon involvement with some of your calf complex, that is something that you need to keep into account as well, and just give them that sort of period to let the scarring settle, let everything heal before you then start to load it back up again.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, same stages of rehab. Just some will come introduced quicker than others based on the grade, where it is, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Could we quickly walk through that grading system you're talking about? 2A, 2B, 2C?
Yeah, so it's quite specific. So there's a certain number. I don't know exactly the numbers off the top of my head, but an A is myofascial. So basically, none of the muscle tissue itself is affected. It's all fascial involvement or muscular involvement. So the B is the distal muscular, not necessarily distal, it is a muscular tendinous junction. So you do have some damage to the muscle tissue itself, which will then impact your ability to produce force. A C is if there's tendinous involvement, essentially. So any sort of like central tendon stuff with the hamstring, that classifies as a tendon as well. If you have a look, I think it's the Pollack 2016 or 17. There's a paper out there, and it's got the grading systems of exactly what metrics they would use to classify it as a 1, 2, or 3, and whether it's an A, B, and C. But yeah, in summary, A is myofascial, B is muscular tendinous, and C is tendon.